Blessings, beloveds. Anastasia with you today. Alright, so today's presentation is going to be on midpoints, and I'm going to try and do this in a short time. I know I always say that. I'm going to actually use a very personal example from my own life to demonstrate to you just how powerful midpoints are. And if you're not aware of them, what you can actually essentially be missing to notice and be aware of in your birth chart. Now, first of all, there are many midpoints in the chart, and some of the main ones that are used are the Sun-Moon midpoint is extremely important, many others as well. And one that I want to bring people's attention to, which is not spoken about too much, is the ascendant midheaven midpoint. The reason that's so important is because the ascendant being self, environment, and how others see you, and lots of other things as well, such as the physical body, etc. And the midheaven being your social ego structure, your social self, how you are seen out there socially by the entire world. So bringing the ascendant and the midheaven together in the sense of through a midpoint, what we're looking at is the midpoint actually activates that primary energy of the ascendant and the midheaven if you have a planet on that midpoint, right? So if you don't have a planet on that midpoint, then this doesn't really apply to you. However, if you do have a planet in your natal birth chart on that midpoint, which will be sitting around in what's called the 11th house of your birth chart, that particular planet on that midpoint is going to be the primary activator of your ascendant midheaven part of life. And how you actually express that part of you in the outer world. It's a really important midpoint, and it's very powerful. So, for example, if you had Pluto on that midpoint, then you would have a really powerful personality, social structure out there in the world. You would be a person who has a lot of power and makes a lot of impact on a social level, and therefore influencing a lot of people's lives, including your own. That's just a very small summary and a small example, but a very powerful one. So this, I mean, I could, we could talk about what every planet on that midpoint could potentially mean, but I'm not going to do that because I want to try and utilize the time today to actually demonstrate to you how powerful midpoints are. From the point of view of, now what I've just mentioned is midpoints in terms of your natal birth chart, right? That's one thing. And another thing is when you're looking at your, say you wanted to look at your chart today, right? In terms of what's happening to your birth chart today according to what's happening in the heavens, the location of all the planets. So where are the planets transiting at the moment in the heavens, and what relationship are they forming to your actual birth chart? So you will have transits from the planets in their positions in the heavens at the moment affecting different areas of your life through the different areas of the chart that the transiting planets are corresponding to. Okay, now sometimes what happens is that a planet in the heavens at the moment, so let's just use Pluto. Pluto at the moment is at, I think it's about 19 degrees of Capricorn. Now, if you don't have anything obvious when you're looking at your birth chart, just looking at it, and you can't see anything at 19 of Capricorn, such as having a planet at 19 of Capricorn, then you would immediately assume that transiting Pluto at the moment is not really doing anything to a planet in your birth chart. However, it is doing something to a house in your chart. So if you had Capricorn in the 7th house, the sign on the descendant was Capricorn, and therefore the 7th house was predominantly Capricorn, then transiting Pluto at the moment would be in your 7th house. And that alone is an incredibly, incredibly powerful transit. That is another story though. I just want to get your attention and your mind back to midpoints. So what you would do is you would, I don't know obviously what astrological software each of you are using. Many might be using the free resources available online, and the most common one seems to be astro.com. I personally use Solarfire. I've had this program for a very, very long time, and it's very easy for me to punch in my details, get my chart up, right click on the right hand side of the screen, click into reports, and reports will give me a number of different options. One of those options being midpoint listing, that's what it's called, okay? So midpoint listing is going to show me every single midpoint in my entire birth chart, okay? From a planetary point of view and a zodiacal point of view, okay? So let me just explain what that means. A planetary point of view means that it will start with the sun, for example, and then it will go through the order of all the planets, okay, in columns. So starting with the sun, it will show me the degrees of my sun, which happens to be 28 degrees of Aries, and then it'll just follow in order sun, moon, sun, Venus, sun, Mercury, sun, Mars, etc., etc., etc. So when I say sun, moon being the right next to it, it'll have the actual midpoint of my sun and moon. So what is the midpoint for my sun and moon location, in other words? Okay, so this is how you look at it. The second half of that page that you open in terms of the zodiacal order, well, it's literally the whole zodiacal zodiac from 0 degrees to 360 degrees, so from 0 Aries right through to the end of Pisces, every single degree and the midpoint connecting to that, okay? I know that probably sounds a little bit confusing if you haven't played around with midpoints, but just like everything, it takes practice, and it just takes exploring and investigating and looking and learning, obviously. Okay, so midpoints are really essential in astrological work, okay? So if you aren't already looking at them, then this is one of the main reasons I'm doing this video, because I want to encourage you to start paying attention. As I said, I'm going to use a very personal example, and it's going to demonstrate to you very, very clearly the power of midpoints. Before I do that, I just want to mention a couple of things. When you're looking at your horoscope chart, just a couple of tips which you may or may not be aware of. Your ascendant is a really potent point in the chart, and its actual ruler is known as the ruler of the chart, okay? So if you haven't heard that before, well, here's an opportunity to start thinking about that. Because quite often people are thinking, I'm a sun sign Leo, or I'm a sun sign Sag, and I'm a moon in Pisces, and etc., etc. But whilst all that is, you know, super important, never neglect the ruler of your actual chart, which is the ruler of the ascendant. And bear in mind, if you have a dual rulership, as some signs have a dual rulership, such as Scorpio, Pisces, just forgotten the rest, had a blank spot. Anyway, so if you have a dual rulership, pay attention to both rulers. So if you had Scorpio rising, you would look at Mars and you would look at Pluto, okay? Mars would be predominantly the primary ruler of your whole chart, so you would look at the location of Mars, the sign it's in, etc. I would also encourage you to look at the secondary ruler, which is Pluto, just to get more information, more understanding of the story of the ruler of your chart and how it's all operating, but always consider the first ancient ruler as the primary ruler of your chart. Just something I wanted to mention in case you're not aware of, and in case you are not looking at that, that's something you need to be looking at. Another thing I wanted to mention, which I could probably do a whole video on this, so I'm not sure if I should go into it now. Okay, I'll just briefly mention it. So, in terms of your birth chart, okay, I've drawn my chart here because it's just easy to use because I know my chart really well. Now, you may not be able to see all this very, very clearly. Okay, so I have Aquarius rising, I have Aries on the IC down here, my Sun's down here, Mercury's down here, Saturn is down here, and the goddess asteroid Ceres is down here as well. It's a bit hard because I'm looking at it sort of backwards, if you like. Okay, so I've got Leo on the descendant because I've got Aquarius rising, and I've got 20 degrees of Libra on my midheaven because I've got Aries in the IC. Now, just let me get some perspective here. Okay, so this first, what we call the first quadrant, which is from the ascendant to the IC, that's the first quadrant. The second quadrant is this one. The third quadrant is from the descendant to the midheaven, and the last quadrant is from the midheaven to the 12th house. Okay, now these four quadrants, as they are called, are really interesting to pay attention to, in the sense where if you've got a lot of planets on the left side of the chart, say you had nothing on that side and you had everything on this side, that means something very specific, okay? And if you had planets on this side of the chart and none on that side of the chart, again, that gives a very different meaning in terms of how your chart is operating. So if you had a lot of planets on the left-hand side of the chart, it really makes a statement about you being here this lifetime on a level of needing a lot of independence and pretty much doing your own thing. There's your experience is not about learning through relationships as such so much. It's more about learning to develop your own sort of independence and courage, and needing to direct your life. You know, it's making decisions. It's a very Aries type of energy, so it's about making decisions yourself and really learning about courage, independence, and making your own decisions. So a lot of your lessons and experiences are going to come through yourself primarily. And if you had planets on the other side of the chart, then a lot of your life theme is about learning through relationships. So the interaction and engagement you have with people, all the different relationships that you have, your greatest lessons and growth and development and soul growth is going to come through your relationships. So just a little tip again, really interesting to observe whether you have many things on the left side or the right side. And again, another thing to also note is, so this is the bottom part of the chart, or the lower part, which is midnight. This is midnight down here, and this is sunrise up here. So this is below the horizon. This is basically nighttime. So this is when you're seeing the night sky, and when you've got a lot of planets down here, then you are operating very differently to what you would if you had planets above the horizon, okay, in this part of the chart. So again, if you had planets down the bottom part of your chart, it's a very it's a life that's connected to a lot of internal work, okay, to a degree, apart from the first house and second house, I guess. But it is below the horizon, so it is very much internal, reflective, introspective, unconscious growth, development, understanding, etc. And if you had a lot of planets above the horizon, then you are operating very much on an external, out there level. So a lot of your life is very much connected to people seeing what you're doing in terms of your life path, direction, interactions that you have, and so forth. You're a out there sort of person as opposed to an inner kind of person. So these are just a few tips again to notice with your own birth chart. in terms of do you have a lot of planets on the left or the right, or below the horizon or above the horizon. And you may not have any of those. You may have a fairly equal distribution of the planets in your chart, which I actually do. For instance, I have strong 12th house, strong 4th house, strong 1st house, strong 9th house. So I kind of have a bit of a distribution all around my chart. I like to think that makes me balanced. Not that you wouldn't be balanced if you didn't have that, but that's just how I feel. That's one of the words that I feel sort of describes the various components in my life as seen through my birth chart. Okay, so that aside, and I could really talk a lot more about that clearly, but I just wanted to just give a little intro and just get you thinking about those components of the birth chart if you are not already doing that. Okay, back to midpoints. Just going to have a drink. All right, so as I said, pay very close attention to the ascendant midheaven midpoint. If you have a planet on that midpoint, which its location would be in the 11th house, that planet is very much connected to how you're driving your whole life, your life path, vocation, direction, and so forth. That planet on that midpoint is going to show you how you get there, and what it is that gets you there, what style that gets you there, what theme that runs through getting you there. As I mentioned earlier, if it's Pluto, you know, you have very, very, one could say even dominating personality, very strong personality, okay, that's seen out there by the public. If it was Venus, you know, then you'd have more of a Venusian theme to your personality, your life, and how you're seen out there. So maybe you're an artist, a dancer, musician, or artistry in all the forms. So yeah, pay attention to that, quite apart from the sun-moon midpoint, which is massive and major as well. Okay, now the example I'm going to use with transiting midpoints, okay, is related to an event that is a traumatic event that happened to me in my life last year. So just a little bit of background. I'm an astrologer, as you guys know. I'm also a counselor, and I was also working for a women's organization where I was taking care of homeless girls, all aged from anywhere from 13 to 17. Okay, these particular girls were what is termed very high-risk clients, based on their background and where they've come from and what they've experienced and how they've ended up where they've ended up. Quite often severe mental health issues, drug and alcohol, you know, substance abuse is present. So we are talking about, unfortunately, girls who are incredibly dysfunctional on so many levels through no fault of their own. Circumstances has created their life in such a way so they end up in particular places, and yeah, so I've been working with this organization for quite some time, like a few years, and I always felt a lot of anxiety every time I went to work, because unfortunately these particular clients have a lot of aggression issues, so they can be incredibly violent, and there wasn't much there to serve as a deterrent or as a protective mechanism for staff. Hence we were always all staff was pretty much always on their toes. You just had to be, because in a split second anything can happen. Okay, so it's quite a dangerous environment to work in, and I had been working in it for quite a few years. I had a few close calls prior to this incident, but finally there was an incident that erupted where I was severely assaulted. I sustained some injuries to my head and to my chest and to my neck, and I was taken to the emergency department that night immediately after the incident. So it was quite serious, to the point where I literally had to stop working in that job and in that particular role. It was quite a traumatic experience for me, for many different reasons, as you can imagine. It was fast, it was brutal, it was unexpected, and I had no help at all. Okay, so I just had to pretty much try and what I tried to do was just cover my face as much as I could, because I weigh 53 kilos. This person is double my size, and she was really laying into my head, smashing her knees into my face, into my head, punching me. It was really intense, and I couldn't actually do anything other than just try and protect myself as much as I could, until finally the incident came to an end when somebody did come to help. And ironically, it was another client in the house who was a very strong person, and who came to my aid, and that was fortunate for me, because I dare say that I would have sustained much more serious injuries had it kept on going. It was going for a couple of minutes. So, not a nice experience, and it has created some trauma for me in my life, and the various things that I've had to do to try and heal and recover from such a brutal attack in a workplace where I'm supposed to be safe, and where I'm there to help these girls and to take care of them. So it was hurtful on a lot of different levels, as you can imagine. Okay, so when I look at my birth chart for the time of year that this happened, which was last year, in terms of transits, there's not a great deal showing in terms of, there's not a transit that specifically describes an event like this that could potentially take place in my life at that time, okay? However, when I turn to midpoints, the whole story is right there, okay? It's very, very clear. So what I'm going to do is just tell you what those midpoints were, which describe the various aspects of this story, okay? So first of all, what I had was, at that time, transiting Pluto in the heavens, which currently is at 19 degrees of Capricorn. At that time, it was at 15 degrees of Capricorn, okay? Now, I don't have anything at 15 degrees of Capricorn in my chart. I actually have Mars at 22 degrees of Capricorn, but that orb is too wide, okay? So Pluto is actually only starting to near my natal Mars now, and really it's only going to get there end of next year sometime, okay? So Pluto was too far away to be aspecting my Mars, which would have been a perfect interpretation of the incident that took place, okay? So, now, transiting Pluto at that time was at 15 degrees of Capricorn, as I just said. Now, what was going on with that was that when I look at my midpoints, okay, and I go to Chiron and midheaven, in the midpoint listing, okay, transiting Pluto was actually conjunct the midpoint of Chiron and midheaven in my birth chart, okay? So, it's very interesting actually, and I'll just show you where that would be placed, for instance. So, this is my 12th house, okay, and my Mars is actually at 22 degrees of Capricorn, and so therefore transiting Pluto is in the 12th, and at the time it was above my Mars. So the midpoint of Pluto in here at 15 degrees was aspecting my midheaven, okay, and Chiron. So that's the midpoint of those 2 points. Now, what does that mean? Okay, so, well, midheaven is my career. It's my social status. It's where I am out there in the world doing my thing, whatever that may be. Okay, so I happen to be an astrologer, I happen to be a counselor, and at that point in time I was what's called a youth worker. Okay, so the midheaven, MC as it's known, is your life out there in public. Okay, so here we have transiting Pluto conjunct my midheaven and Chiron midpoint, as I just showed you visually in my own chart. Okay, midheaven, as I said, is my life out there in terms of career. Pluto rules violence, power struggles, and power being taken away from you. Okay, or your own personal power, depending on obviously the story, circumstances, etc. In this particular case, it was my power, my personal power was violated, and I was disempowered, and I couldn't do anything about it during that time. So, transiting Pluto, conjunct Chiron, MC. Now, Chiron in this picture really describes the wounding component that I experienced. Now, I experienced psychological, emotional, and physical wounding because it was traumatic on a number of different levels for me. Okay, so that's a very clear transiting midpoint of Pluto conjunct the MC Chiron midpoint in my chart. Okay, so that's one. There are several others. Now, bear in mind, as I said to you, there were no obvious transits happening in my chart at that time that could describe this event, but the midpoints are very, very clear. Okay, the next midpoint was transiting Saturn, which was at 9 degrees of Sag at that time, happened to be conjunct my Pluto-North Node midpoint. Okay, now Saturn rules limitations and restrictions, and a number of other different things as well, and the Pluto is that power issue that I talked about, power struggle, and the North Node is a change of direction, and ultimately after that incident, my life path changed direction. It literally changed direction. Okay, so that's the transiting Saturn on Pluto North Node midpoint. That was happening at the same time as well. And I just want to read something to you. By the way, this is the book that you need. If you don't have it, I suggest you get it. That is if you're serious about astrology and you really want to learn. Okay, this is the best book written on midpoints. Okay, I've sussed out a few other books, and I ordered one online the other day, and just to see if there was something extra or more interesting out there, and I was left sort of a little bit disappointed with the other book that I ordered. Now, I've had this book for years and years and years, since I first started astrology. This is a very old book by Reinhold Overton, okay, and a combination of stellar influences. This is the best book on midpoints by far. Nothing's been written like it yet, okay. It's a really great book to have. It goes through all the midpoints of every planetary combination, okay, so Sun, Moon, Sun, Mercury, Jupiter, Mars, you know, etc., etc., etc. Okay, it goes through all the midpoints and what the possible outcome could be. All right, so if you're having a transiting planet on a powerful midpoint in your chart, this is the book that's going to help you understand what's going on. Now, I must admit that the way this book is written is what I would call, I guess, very realistic. Okay, it's a bit harsh in a sense, okay, but it is also incredibly realistic in terms of it doesn't fluff around, and it doesn't make things pretty. It really just calls things for what they actually are. Okay, so what it has as well on so here, for example, on this page here, you've got Pluto and what's called Dragon's Head, which is the North Node. Okay, you've got that page, and then on the other side you've got the midpoint of Pluto North Node, and if you had one of these planets transiting the midpoint of Pluto North Node, this is the meaning that you get. All right, so the left hand side goes through what's called the principle, the psychological correspondence, the biological correspondence, the sociological correspondence, and the probable manifestations. Okay, so it's very well, it breaks it down to a number of different levels. Okay, it's really good stuff. Anyway, all right, so now Pluto North Node midpoint for me back in August last year, transiting Saturn came along and hit my Pluto North Node midpoint when I was assaulted in my workplace. Okay, so listen to this. Now, there will be some elements of this that you might struggle to relate to my story, but just wait till you hear the last aspect of this comment. Saturn on my Pluto North Node midpoint. A lack of adaptability, rebelliousness, or truculence, revolt, the fighting against oppression, a violent termination of relationships. Now, to me, that speaks very, very clearly. Don't know if it speaks clearly to you, but it speaks very clear to me. Perhaps because I'm used to this particular language of this book as well. As I said, this book doesn't color things, it doesn't fluff it, you know, make things fluffy and pretty. It's very direct, and it can feel or be heard as very, very harsh. But that's life, you know. We have the beautiful components, and we have the challenging, more harsher elements of life as well. It's, you know, we can't deny that. So it is what it is. Now, in addition to this midpoint, what I also had, so I had 4 very clear, direct, powerful midpoints that were hit exactly on the day of this incident. So I told you what the first one was, which was transiting Pluto conjunct Chiron MC. The second one is transiting Saturn on my Pluto North Node. Pardon me. And there is another one which involves transiting Neptune. I don't want to overwhelm you too much, so I won't go into that. But I do want to go into this final one, because this final one, I think, really nails it to a T. Okay, so what I also had was transiting Mars during this time on my Moon Pluto midpoint. Now, that's pretty literal. Okay, Mars, violence; Pluto, power struggles; Moon, my security. All of it violated. Okay, so I just want to tell you what this book says about having Mars on the Moon Pluto midpoint. Great changes of mood, easy excitability, the inclination to outbursts of anger, quarrels, injuries. Okay, I don't think you can get much more literal than that, right? Now, if you're not convinced that midpoints are powerful after this story, then you may as well just walk away from working with astrology. I've just given you a really powerful story, true story of my own life. Not a nice one. It's taken me a long time to recover from this. Yeah, so anyway, I hope that this demonstration has shown you how powerful transiting planets can be on natal midpoints in your chart. Okay, it's important to understand this from many different levels, and of course, as I pointed out in the beginning, via transit, there was nothing obvious happening in my chart at that time. Okay, now I'm not talking about other techniques of prediction or forecast. There are others. You know, there are secondary progressions. There is the secondary progressed moon. There is Fedaria periods from Horary and medieval astrology. There's primary directions. There's a number of different other techniques and methods that one would use for forecasting and prediction as well, some of which are far more complicated. But when it comes to transits, transits is the easiest generally to see very quickly. Okay, midpoints, you don't have to do a lot of work with that. You don't have to do any calculations. The computer, the software that you're using brings it all up for you. You just need to look with your eye and identify which midpoints are where and where the transiting planets are at the moment, and find the correlation if there are any there at the moment for you or at any other time. Okay, so I think I'll leave it there. We're on 35 minutes. Yep, beautiful. So midpoints, guys, pay attention to them. They do activate things in our chart, as I've just demonstrated to you. And as I said, pay attention to the things that I mentioned at the beginning of this video in terms of where you have a lot of action in your chart: bottom half, top half, left side of the chart, right side of the chart, and so forth. Planetary ruler of the ascendant is the primary ruler of your birth chart. You need to know what that is if you already don't. Pay attention to where that is natally, what sign it's in, what house it's in, and what aspects it has. Okay, the house that it's in shows you where that energy of the ruler of your chart, wherever it's located, it's showing you the area of life that is most what would be the right word? It's the area of your life that takes up most of your energy. Okay, that's where you're operating from. So the house shows the area that you operate through, what's really important to you as well. The sign shows the various psychological personality components of the energy of that planet, and the aspects to that planet being the ruler of your ascendant, shows the effort and the energy and the influx of energy, whether it's aided through other planets. So is the ruler to your ascendant being helped by the other planets in your chart, or is it being blocked, frustrated, limited? And it will be one or the other generally.